Daniel's 70th week prophecy, Part 1. It may commence sooner than you think. How, when, and what? How will it happen? When will it happen? And what will occur during? Welcome to Chapter 2, Daniel's 70th week in the Hebrew calendar. In this chapter we'll discuss what is Daniel's 70th week, the prophetic timeline, 70 times 7 weeks of years, the Hebrew calendar and feasts, and the potential 7-year periods each year beginning in 2014 through 2020 to see if Daniel's 70th week could happen sometime in this decade. So what is Daniel's 70th week anyway? First, let me start by saying what Daniel's 70th week isn't. It is not what has commonly been referred to as the 7-year tribulation period. That is not a scriptural term. Actually, the first 3.5 years will be pretty peaceful. It is the second 3.5 years that will be terrible as the whole world suffers under the wrath of Satan, scripturally referred to as the Great Tribulation. And towards the end of the 3.5 years, the day of the Lord's wrath will commence to judge wicked mankind, and finally the Messiah will return to conquer his enemies in the battle of Armageddon and usher in the 1,000-year Messianic kingdom. In Daniel 9:24, he is told by the angel that Israel was to be allotted a specific amount of time. It would be 70 times 7 weeks of years, or 490 years. This period was to begin at a specific time in the future from Daniel's perspective. The sign would be when the decree would be issued from the king of Persia to rebuild Jerusalem. This specifically occurred in 445 BC with the decree of Artaxerxes to Nehemiah to rebuild the city of Jerusalem that had been destroyed by the Babylonians. After 69 weeks of years, or 483 years, however, the coming prince or Messiah would be cut off. This occurred in April 32 AD, with the triumphal entry of Jesus into Jerusalem exactly 483 years after the edict. The crucifixion was his being cut off. There would be a gap for the fullness of the Gentiles to be completed between the 69th and 70th week. That gap has lasted nearly 2,000 years. We're still in it, in other words. It is the contention of this presentation that the 70th week of Daniel is near at hand to bring the culmination of the age and to usher in the 1,000-year Messianic age. As will be seen, several signs have or will soon occur that may reveal when the final week will begin. 2 critical signs already have occurred that needed to happen in order for the final week to begin. The first occurred in 1948 with the rebirth of the nation of Israel. The second occurred in 1967 with Israel's recapturing of the city of Jerusalem and the Temple Mount. Here is an example of the 70 weeks prophecy. 70 times 7 weeks equals 490 years, which equals 10 Jubilee cycles of 49 years each. Year 1 began on March 15, 445 BC, with the edict to rebuild Jerusalem. There were to be 10 Jubilee cycles left for Israel. However, in the 69th week, or 483 years later, the Messiah the Prince made his triumphal entry, and it was cut short by his crucifixion. Since that time, there has been a nearly 2,000-year gap for the fullness of the Gentiles to be fulfilled. After this, the 70th week of Daniel will commence, which will culminate in the Messianic Jubilee year directly following. One critical note is that scripturally the Jubilee cycles are 49 years each, not 50 years. Every 50th year was to be a Jubilee year. However, it is actually the first year of the next Jubilee cycle. And this is critical to note in order to keep the timing correct. Here is a view of the Hebrew calendar consisting of 12, 29, or 30-day months. But if the new moon is not visible, On the 29th or 30th day of Adar, a second month of Adar is added, making the year 13 months long instead of 12. The beginning of the religious calendar is the spring feasts of Nisan. Passover begins at sundown on Nisan 14, and that is followed by the Feast of Unleavened Bread, the Feast of First Fruits, and Pentecost 50 days later. When Jesus came the first time, he fulfilled all 4 of the spring feasts. The beginning of the civil calendar and the fall feasts is with Tishri 1, which is the Feast of Trumpets, or Rosh Hashanah, followed by Yom Kippur, the Day of Atonement, Sukkot, which is the Feast of Tabernacles, finally with the Feast of Dedication, or Hanukkah, 75 days after the Day of Atonement. Biblical time versus our Western time. The Jewish calendar consists of 12 or 13, 29 or 30-day months, and it generally follows a lunar cycle. However, in some years, if you recall, an extra month of Adar is added to catch the calendar up to the correct timing of the seasons. The calendar follows a cycle called the Metonic cycle that repeats every 19 years. And generally, the leap years in the Hebrew calendar are added about every 3rd year. However, sometimes it occurs just 2 years after the previous leap year, based on whether the Nisan moon is visible or not on the last day of Adar. And for an excellent discussion on this topic, see Dr. Gavin Finley's website, endtimepilgrim.org. Now, the West uses the Gregorian calendar, which consists of 365.242 days, to be specific, following the solar cycles. In order to catch our calendar up, 1 day is added every 4 years, and this is known as our leap year. All Bible prophecy follows the Hebrew calendar and the Metonic cycle, and also coincides with the Jewish feasts. This has been a major source of confusion throughout the centuries in trying to determine the timing of Daniel's first 69 weeks and the future 70th week. This is because most scholars were trying to figure this out using the Western Gregorian calendar. And it was not until Sir Robert Anderson discovered the biblical Metonic timing in 1898 that the 69 weeks were figured out. See his important work called The Coming Prince. So how does the Hebrew calendar and the 70th week connect? Now this is going to seem confusing, so please hang with me on this for a while. The 70th week consists of 7 years. However, it is important to note the amount of time in months, days, and years this 7 years refers to. In both Daniel and in Revelations, there are specifically 4 different timelines mentioned regarding the second half of the 70th week. Many just skip over these thinking they don't relate together. But if the angels of the Lord mention them, maybe they're important. It helps us to narrow down which 7-year period we should look for. Some periods of 7 years work per the Hebrew calendar and some do not. And here are the 4 timelines. The angel told Daniel that a king would arise that would oppress the holy people for a time, times, and half a time. Elsewhere in Revelation, John is told that the beast would arise to exercise his authority for 42 months. Elsewhere, God will give power to the 2 witnesses who shall prophesy for 1260 days. And he, the beast, will confirm a covenant with the many for 1 week, the 70th week, and in the midst, or 3.5 years, he will cause the sacrifice and oblations to cease. Note, a time, times, and half a time equals 42 months, which equals 1260 days, which equals 3.5 years. Now, what makes the Hebrew calendar even more confusing is that it really doesn't have a set 360 days each year. That would be too simple. Instead, it can vary from 353, 354, or 355 days, or during the leap years, they can have 383, 384, or 385 days. Yikes! So in order to figure out the prophetic timeline, you have to manually plug in each of the 7 years to see what the timing looks like. Because remember, we have to have the exact timing of 1260 days, or 42 months, for the beast's reign during the second half of the week. And, as mentioned earlier, in Jesus' first coming, he fulfilled all 4 of the spring feasts. Daniel's 70th week will follow the fall feasts, which, if you recall, begins in the month of Tishri, which is September or October. What is critical, it should be noted, is that the 7-year period has to have these particular characteristics. As you'll see, the beginning of the week is in the month of Tishri in year 1 and will end in the month of Tishri in year 7. The only way this can occur is if there are only 86 moon phases during the 7 years. The other alternative of 87 moons throws the calendar off of the correct timing. And there can only be 84 months. 42 months for the first half and 42 for the second half of the 7 years. This is because, if you recall, 42 months is specifically stated as the duration of the beast's reign in Revelation 13:5. The only other alternative is 43 months for the first half and 43 months for the second half of the 7 years. This, of course, is too long. And the Feast of Passover is at the midpoint of the 70th week of Daniel. So the total duration must be 2,520 days, which equals a total of 7 years. And it commences with the Israeli signing of the 7-year peace treaty with the leader of the final 8-nation beast empire, who, I contend, is the nation of Turkey. The last day of the week will be on Yom Kippur 7 years later. I hope your head is not swimming by now. But here's what we have. We have a Hebrew calendar that consists of varying days of 353, 354, or 355 days, or 383, 384, or 385 days in the leap years. So only a specific 7-year cycle will work. Also, we need a period of 1260 plus 1260 days, which equals 2520 days, ending on Yom Kippur, the Day of Atonement. So the second half must be 1260 days for the beast's reign, and a few added days to get us to the 2520 days. And as you'll see, the first half of the 70th week may not be exactly 1260 days, but more on that later. Just remember Yom Kippur. But that's not all. The angel adds a bit more information. Daniel 12:11 says, "And from the time that the daily sacrifice is taken away, and the abomination of desolation is set up, there shall be 1,290 days." This is very important, since it plays right into the timing on the Hebrew calendar. After the beast is defeated, there is an additional month added. But why? I know this tends to be a bit confusing, but stick with me because this is very important to the discussion on the 70th week, because the angel goes on to add even more. Daniel 12:12 says, "Blessed is the one who waits for and reaches the end of the 1335 days." So he goes on to add an additional 45 days. So this is what it looks like. There's 2,520 days plus 30 days plus 45 days, which equals Daniel's 70th week plus an additional 75 days, or exactly 2,595 days from the signing of the 7-year peace treaty to the consecration of the Millennial Temple on Hanukkah. It happens to be exactly 75 days from Yom Kippur to Hanukkah. So without us knowing when Daniel's 70th week will start, it is really hard to see how we can get there from here. The next slide will help us discover that. Now I'm kind of a picture guy, so this is going to try to illustrate to you how this 86 and 87 7-year moon cycles looks like from the signing of the treaty to the defeat of the Antichrist. Remember, it must begin on the month of Tishri in year 1 and end on the month of Tishri in year 7. Immediately you can see in Tishri 2014 it can begin and end on Tishri 2021. This is how the rest of this decade looks like. So what you see here is that there are only 3 possible years that the 70th week of Daniel can begin remaining in this decade, because they have the requisite 86 moons. They are 2014, 2016, and 2019. And you would see, if I had room, that 2020 wouldn't work as well because it has 87 moons. One interesting note is that on the off-cycle years, the entry into or the exit out of the 70th week falls on another month besides that of Tishri, and they are the months of Heshvan and Elul. And to see how I came up with the timing, please see my appendices at the end of this presentation. Thank you for watching Chapter 2. Please continue on to Chapter 3 for more of my study on Daniel's 70th week prophecy. In Chapter 3, we'll cover when must the 70th week begin, and also a Part 1 review and the appendices that I've referred to earlier.